Morning. The light is crazy today, so I'm just gonna soak it up because it feels good. So yesterday I made a video that I felt really good about because I find that it's so frequent for us to put ourselves into a category or into some box that doesn't completely fit just to appease, and that doesn't work for me. So I'm thankful that I allowed myself a moment to gather and express to you just how important it is for me to represent a more eclectic spiritual approach rather than working in a more dogmatic fashion. So I want to talk a little bit about something that came up right before I closed my eyes last night. Since the graduation of this last group of yoga teachers, I've gotten some really incredible feedback. I've received feedback from these teachers who are now going out into the world, both from studio owners, from experienced practitioners, from their students, with shock that they're new teachers. And I feel that that's because they're queuing, which is something that is really unfortunately uncommon. For those of you who take yoga classes, the next time that you go, I want you to imagine that you didn't know the names of any posture and what that class would be like if the teacher didn't say the names of anything. And the reason that I want you to think this way is because a yoga teacher is an educator. And when that person arrives to hold space and educate, it is absolutely vital that education happens, that it isn't just let me say names of stuff that you already know, and if you don't already know, look around at me, compare yourself to me, look around at the others in the room, compare yourself to them. Good morning, I love you guys. That's not teaching. That's actually imitation, and it breeds a lot of self-consciousness, it breeds a lot of comparison, it breeds a lot of what we're already kind of doing in here. And so one of the most fundamental components of every training that I at least am comfortable leading is to remove this concept that someone already knows what Warrior One is. Because they did come to a yoga class to be educated, and even if they've been taking classes for a decade like I have, I still have come for an education, and to learn something new, I have a personal practice. So when I go to a class, I hope that I will be introduced to perceptions, to tools, to new sensations maybe, from my teacher who is supposed to be educating me on what depth of experience I'm capable of feeling. And I am very spoiled. I come from incredible teachers. I come from teachers who you walk in and you leave a different human being. I come from teachers who ask me to excavate parts of my experience that I never would have taken myself into. And they do that by asking me to feel my little toe and where it's placed. And they do that by asking me to acknowledge the spaces between my ribs. And they do that by allowing me to experience what it feels like not to go based on my programs of what I think things are, but to experience each opportunity as something new, each moment as something new. Every time entering into a posture, whether I've been there thousands of times or not, my body cellularly is different. My mind is always going to be different. My emotional state is always going to be different. And so by guiding and actually instructing and offering education surrounding some of the sensations to peek at while in this experience, I believe that we create both an educational environment and the opportunity to submerge more deeply than we might if we were surrounded by our own work in our own homes, especially those of us who have a personal practice. If you go to a class, you're hoping that that for some reason this is going to offer you something that your own personal practice cannot. And so if you've been practicing for a long time, you already know what you imagine high lunge to be, warrior two to be. You already have that perception. And so it's important that when you go to experience the essence of both community and space being held, but also that you are being guided in a way where you don't need to look around, where you don't need to feel confusion and comparison, but rather that you can actually pay attention to each subtle component, each subtle cue that you're offered, each tiny little thing that all creates the building blocks. And I think that's absolutely vital if you're going to be instructing people into shapes that maybe have something that they perceived was impossible. One of the fundamental components of that is actually building a structure of understanding of what key components are happening in the body, and allowing muscle memory to build by continuously offering information and insight about what is taking place in the sacrum, about what is taking place in the alignment of the spine, about where the energy is moving in order to draw this shape. And so I believe deeply that cueing, it should be one of the fundamental components of being able to call yourself a teacher. And so it's been really beautiful since the graduation of this last group, them receiving feedback that people are shocked that they're new teachers. They're amazed that they don't need to stare at the teacher. It's just beautiful to see that happening. And I'm thankful for that, because I feel like that's the bare minimum that I can offer them, is to be able to lead a class without needing to demonstrate it in order to offer that information. To be able to lead a class without needing to say the names of the postures, to actually be able to say what's going on, because that's a reflection of an intimate relationship with that. It means that you've practiced it enough to know what's happening, so that you can actually offer some of what's going on, so that a person who is coming there to learn can truly learn something. And so that's really vital to me. But I think that's really beautiful. And also in understanding the anatomical and energetic components of posture, it becomes a lot easier to sequence a class that actually builds in a direction towards something, that actually helps a student develop the muscle memory, the awareness, the safety, and the structure that can then guide them in a direction that they maybe didn't think was possible. And part of that capacity to do that comes from being able to offer that information, that these things are happening. Okay, now we're going to do this, and these things are happening again. Can you feel them? And then we're doing this again, and now look at here. Look what your navel is doing. Look what your legs are doing. And to be able to offer those insights, and then to see how that helps the evolution of the experience, that helps to build a practice, to build spaces of unraveling that may not have unraveled otherwise. There are areas and cavities of my physical experience that I won't go in without my teacher's guidance to take me there sometimes. I slowly, scratch the surface of what lies in those cracks. But when the really, really powerful teachers offer me invitations into these areas. And it's so evident that they've been excavating and exploring these areas themselves. And then I trust that, because I trust the dedication that it takes to even understand what that feels like, let alone to be able to explain it, and then to invite someone to move into those areas with you. I feel like that is an expertise that I have a deep reverence for. And it just goes so far beyond, copy what I'm doing and saying the names of postures. And then that moves me into the anatomical structure that does definitely vary between men and women, and how the posture can adapt to the female experience. And by female experience, I also mean our hormone systems. Because throughout different phases of the month, for those of us who are still cycling, we have completely different inner environments that affect our muscle elasticity, our mood, our receptivity, our suppleness. There are so many components to the way that we ebb and flow. And to say that every day this same sequence is going to serve that very different, very fluctuating body has just not been true in my experience. And this comes from, I come from an Ashtanga background. So I've been there. I've done those things. I've been immersed in very structured, very linear, very much do it like this every single day, the exact same way. I've done that. And I've also, experienced all different types of teachers from all different lineages. And one of the things that fundamentally, for me, was absent until finding some of my primary teachers in my life was the concept of learning how to listen to what your body needs, and then helping others, if you're teaching, learn to listen to that as well, so that they're not dependent upon your experience with that posture, but that they are learning how to carve and crack into some of their own. And without that, without the intuition component, we kind of strip away a huge facet of woman. To strip away the intuition of really learning to listen to the body, and also learning to listen to the mind, and learning to listen to what is guiding you, Is it a belief pattern that you can't do something, or is it a belief pattern that there's pain somewhere? Or if we go a layer deeper than just those processes, which is a continued yoga practice, is to move beyond some of those processes and the barriers that they create in our lives. But if we do go a layer deeper into the experience of truly listening to what we need, then that carries over into our entire lives. It carries over into knowing what foods we truly will be fueled by. It carries over into knowing which relationships are going to be serving to us. It carries over into deciding whether or not we are going to make a change in our career path. This is innate listening that doesn't really need to be taught. What needs to happen is a space needs to be created where it's invited, where it's encouraged, where women are listening to that powerful force. We're such intuitive beings, and men, you are intuitive too. I'm not saying that you're not. I'm just speaking to those that I work with right now. But there's so much intuition that is stripped away in every other place in society that I can't allow that to be the environment of the classes that I teach, because it's vital. And without that, I can't imagine. Actually, I can, because I've been in those classes. There's something it's such a gaping wound that is missing, that longing to listen to my own experience. And having done so now in my own personal practice for the extended period of time that I have, to enter into any environment in which my intuition is not only, not welcome, but not even acknowledged. And there's a piece of me that screams when that happens. It's like, but my finger wants to do this, desperately wants to do this, not this. This is what feels amazing to my body. This is what carries vibrations through my entire being. And no one's going to tell me that this doesn't feel better than this, because I feel it. And I've listened long enough to feel it honestly. And that's not to say that on some random day, maybe I want to do this, but on that day, I will listen and I will know that, and then I will do that. And it's teaching people how to listen that I think is significantly more important than teaching people how to do it in the same way every time. I love really luscious, really intricate cueing because it offers magnification of some of the very tiny, subtle sensations that we often don't even notice because we're so in our mind about what's happening that we're only looking at, bigger movements, bigger muscles, bigger shapes than we are, well, what does the sole of your left foot feel like? That kind of concept. And as someone offers, the opportunity to experience that area of your body by cueing in that direction, the experience expands in its sensory depth. And so what is able to be experienced is amplifying. And the possibility of actually feeling the space between one rib and another becomes much more tangible. And I think that's beautiful. I think it's beautiful to have a tangible experience with your anatomy on such a subtle level, as well as to recognize the energetics of the experience coursing through in each moment, and to actually feel almost like a dam breaking, to feel energy moving to different parts of the body that, that are really luscious, really powerful, articulate, I guess, would be a word, instructor allows you to experience in their classes. And so that's one of the fundamental things that is it's vital for me to offer to teachers, is that I could just have you do this whole thing, memorize these postures exactly as they are in this book, and then go and teach them in this exact sequence, and just say the names of the postures, and do them alongside the people, and don't look at the people, and don't help the people, and don't encourage any new experiences within the people. And I feel like I am crushing a piece of the soul in doing that. And so that's not an option for me. So that is one of the ways in which I feel that Wild Essence Yoga School is very different and I encourage you to go to as many yoga classes as you can if anything I'm saying doesn't seem like it might be accurate. Go to lots and then tell me. Tell me all about it. I would love to hear. And if you find wonderful teachers that are, creating and offering extensive education, I want to meet them because I love learning from as many teachers as I can. And never do I walk in and say, fuck this person. Like, that doesn't happen. I will go experience, but then I'll also come home and say, is any of that something that I wish to integrate into my own experience? And then if not, it's just discarded as, okay, that was cool, thanks. That's the way that I go about it. Like, I find that at this point, I desperately long to be guided in a way that digs even deeper into the soil of my experience. And I think that the practice that I've cultivated in my own space is it's so intimate, it's so intuitive, and it's so well informed by some really wonderful anatomy teachers, structure teachers throughout my life that I feel so rooted in it, so anchored in it, that it's hard to even to do anything other than add to that richness, to give it more juice. But one of the big things for me when we were talking about the female body is, yes, the intuitive, the hormonal structuring as well. And knowing that, for example, during menstruation is not the time to practice your splits, even though you might want to because you feel really bendy. You probably should pull back a little bit during that time rather than lean into your flexibility. And how would that be something that anyone would know unless that's taught? Unless that's taught in a way where, when my students go out into the world and take classes, they know that there's more relaxin in their body surrounding the time that they're going to bleed. And so they know that it's not the time to push your flexibility, and you will get hurt eventually, maybe not right away, eventually you will get hurt. And the same thing with rapid movement. If you can't take full breaths, you are sacrificing parts of your physical experience that could very well lead you to get hurt. And I just don't see the benefit outweighing the risk of not learning to truly have an intimate connection with your body, and instead to treat it like a machine and to arrive and to do machine-like function. I've done that. I've experienced this before, and one of the fundamental things that comes up is how much must I hate my body to put it through things that it's screaming not to do. And this doesn't mean that you don't move, that you don't exercise, that you don't know. But if I'm being shown that something is not serving repetitively, whether it be by injury, by tightness, by resistance, by being, for me personally, there was a period of time after a lot of Ashtanga where I couldn't bear weight in my hands at all. And there was a period of time when my sacroiliac joint was so inflamed. This is from yoga. This is why I've had to change how I practice and to learn these things. My sacroiliac joint, for those of you women who don't know where that is, if you take your hands to the bottom of your lumbar spine until you start to feel that there's a bony triangular prominence that points down. And then on either tip of the triangle, so here and here, and you'll feel for like almost a little bit of a divot. And this is where your pelvis and your spine connect to one another. If you have pain there and you have a consistent yoga practice, we can change that. And one of the fundamental shifts there is learning to understand the difference in the female pelvis, and learning to understand that the alignment cueing in some of the more traditional postures, for example, Warrior One, does not actually support the female pelvis in that particular area in the way that it could. And all that would need to happen would be that front foot needs to walk out 8, 9, 11 inches maybe to the outer edge of the mat. And then all of a sudden the compression on the sacroiliac joint is gone. But instead we say, no, do it like this and only like this. And then we end up with, we have billions of women doing yoga all over the world. And we have a whole bunch of them with shoulder injuries from overuse, from too much weight bearing in the hands rather than dispersing the weight evenly between their, upper and lower hemispheres in planks and chaturangas and things like that. It's not saying that you can't do them. It's saying they're not being taught properly. They're being taught rapidly, and then you end up with overuse injuries in the shoulders. You end up with tendonitis in the shoulders. I get really upset about this. So and the pelvis, which is something that I'm so passionate about, the bowl of the womb, for women is just, there's so much information here energetically, and we need to honor it as what it is, which is the cauldron of our experience. And that is for men and women, the cauldron of our creative experience. And by creative, I don't mean whether or not you can paint or whether or not you can draw or sing or dance. That's not what I mean. Creation, the energy of creation, anything that you wish to birth into the world, whether it be something you're doing for your job or, the way that you are keeping your home, all of the components of your creative force are housed here. And there's such an absence of creativity in the world on like a large scale. Mind you, there's tons of amazing creative people, but when you really think about the percentage of people who are willing to allow themselves to be fully devoted to any creative work, like really trusting what they're meant to offer, those who are trusting that they are meant to write a book, or they're trusting that they're meant to start this business, or they're trusting in their creative force, not, suppressing it. The large majority of people won't go there. And I personally believe that in a lot of ways we won't go there in our bodies as well. And as women in particular, I work a lot with intimacy, with trauma, with sexuality, with orgasm, with all of these, all in the same realm, right? Where we are resistant to the creative force. And something came to me last night while I was getting ready to lay down, and I was thinking about how important it is for me to help my students learn to channel their own creativity rather than compare themselves to, what they think it's supposed to be, and learning to listen to your own portal, your own inner voice, so that it can come through you in the way that it was meant to, rather than copying something else that came before you or whatever. And so what came to me was this concept of like, creativity isn't something that can be, it's not a do thing. It's not creating, it's creation. It's a force, like a force of nature that is not something that you do. If anything, I wrote this in the caption, it's something that you succumb to. It's something that takes you. It's something that sweeps in and asks to be acknowledged. And it can come as what almost feels like sexual energy, because it's the same concept. It's the same, it comes from the same, right? The force of creation, right? And so it's a force rather than an action. And I think that component of it means that we need to be willing enough to look, to notice. And then there's a surrender to that force that allows us to experience the deepest levels of intimacy with our lives. And the most inspired experiences that I've ever felt in my entire life have been this. Not something that I've done, but something that I've woken up, and Heather's actually watched this happen. I just either wake up, or it's right before I go to bed, or it's randomly, stuff just starts coming. And I'm just like, I gotta write it somewhere. I have to write it down somewhere, or I have to make it into something, because it's bubbling up. It's not something that I can sit down and go, I create now. It's so, so hard to force the force of nature to be available whenever you decide that it's going to be. But if you tap that well frequently enough that you recognize that this force is present all the time, then maybe you can acknowledge it more frequently, and then you surrender in a more consistent basis. So every time I practice, there's a surrender to that bowl, a surrender to my creative force, my purpose in the world, what I'm meant to birth. And that continuous arrival back to that space allows me to recognize it when it's coming, and to trust it also. And so these are areas that I find are so frequently missing amongst what is being taught as yoga. And this is why, I call my practice more eclectic, because creativity and natural connection and the force that can be felt by just placing your hand on the soil or on the base of a tree, which ultimately is is yogic philosophy as well, is that everything is the same divine expression, but is so much taught in animism, in druidry, in Native American teachings, in shamanism. There's such a connection to the natural world. And that's another thing that isn't an ing connection. That was another thing that came up last night. I'm not connecting to you. I'm acknowledging the connection to you. We like to think that we're the doers of this. We're the doers of the connecting. That it isn't. It isn't that. I'm not connecting my mind with my body, with my spirit. No. I'm acknowledging that this is all connected. I'm acknowledging a force. A state of being, actually. The constant state of being is that of connection. Segmentation is our own creations, our own illusions. Can't actually do it. You didn't actually sever your connection to nature, no matter what you think. It's not, you don't get to. It's not a thing you can do. It's your very nature. It's what you are. It's the state all the time. You can ignore it. You can put dirty clothes on top of it. There's a million things you can do to pretend it's not there. But connection is the state of being of the universe. It's not something that we're doing. And so I struggle with that sometimes, this like, we're going to connect with each other. Not really. Actually, what is happening is you're recognizing that you are one another. Which is like, whoa, I love And I think that like just changing the language a little bit, like a tiny bit, it changes the entire meaning of what we're doing. And I think that that is important, because you don't need to go to yoga to connect with yourself. What? You are connection. And you definitely don't do the yoga. If anything, if anyone's doing anyone, the yoga's doing you. And yoga is connection. So, does that make sense, what I'm trying to say? Like this concept of like, we're misinterpreting the entire thing. We're misinterpreting it into, and we've turned it into what we do in the world, which is, I do the stuff well. And so in that process, we miss the point, like dramatically miss the point. And I think this is the state of being right now when it comes to spirituality, is like, here's the right way to be spiritual. And here's how you become spiritual. And here's how you become connected. And now pay me to make you be connected. What? Like, to me, these are the things that that are just not the way that we roll. Wild Essence Yoga School is that. I mean, I called it Wild Essence because I believe in both the natural and the spiritual being one, first of all, and both being significant. That our tangible physical experience in the natural world is a teacher, and that our essence experience, our subtle body experience, our energetic experience is a profound teacher, and that everything is everything, and that nothing is separate from anything else, and that the connection that you're acknowledging within yourself, within the natural world, within your commune with others, is just the natural state of being. It's not something that you're making happen. It's something that you're moving debris out of the way to recognize that this is actually your natural state. So that is one of the fundamental ways that I believe that what we're doing is different. And I want to talk about, briefly, before my phone dies, I am in the process of creating, and I've taken my time with this, mind you, creating. I'm in the process of being taken by creation when it comes to something that I feel is really, really important, at least for the trainings that I lead. It's not something that I want to push on the yoga community at large, because I don't believe that it will be received, which Maybe I should trust a little bit more. But it is structurally the postural structure based on the female anatomy. And so I'm creating a posture book, just like what you would get for your training, where you see all the different postures. And I am creating this based on the female anatomy, the female pelvis, and also with deep respect and reverence to all different body shapes and types, because the practice shouldn't be something that you're forcing yourself to fit into. It should be something that you're selecting to align with what you intuitively need. And so my intention is, in this creation, for those who take a training with me, who will receive this book of postural alignment for the female body, that you will invite yourself to explore with an open heart and with a trust in your intuition, what your body really calls for. That is really important to me. So, that being said, I love you all so much, and I would love to hear all of your insight, all of your input, all of your opinions, all of your everything. You can put it in the comments, and I will check back later. I love you so much. Mwah.